Okay, everybody, I don't know what happened. We are sorry for those technical difficulties, but the show must go on. And we are so excited today to be with my friend again, Indigo Eriksen. And we again, I wanted to share that we are college professors together at Nova. She's an awesome English instructor who happens to teach literature. She taught this wonderful women's literature course, and it was just amazing the things that she did with her students. Didn't you guys write like I think you wrote an anthology, right, of kind of women's literature? And she's a poet, so we have to listen to her poems. So I'm going to. We're having a little technical difficulty today, so I'm going to mute myself and let her get started talking about herself and gets right into her first poem.
All right, glad to be back with these technical difficulties, hopefully out of the way. And just thank you again for the privilege of being part of your show, Chalet. And for the shout out to the Women in Lit students. Yes, we did do the Stolen Tongues anthology where they created the anthology. Two students were the editors, and I just guided them through the process. They were really powerful. And then in the second time I taught Women in Lit, we had a poet who's also a printer came up and taught us how to make our own chapbooks. And then they also made 3D objects to go with those chapbooks, and of course, all the content. So, Women in Lit is an amazing class, and I'm glad we have it back. So, they took it away, but now it's back. Well, I will start with this first poem that I read a lot at public gatherings. It's called Life Story. I think I've been writing and revising it for like 10 years. And I change it every time that I read it. So it's kind of a fun living poem, sort of. So, Life Story. I tell the story of my life through the journey of my body, but first the other, my mother, and teenaged and too young to have me, but she did. My father, a cowboy turned mechanic, too young to turn his little boy world into husband and father. And soon we said goodbye, mother and I, packed up boxes, book full, and moved. Government housing, community college, apartment to apartment to apartment. Don't know how she did it, but she did. And I grew up. Wings burst forth, and flying I flew. And now, my words, a body. 2 years old and a scar is born. Water like fire burning a path down, 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 traveling chin to navel, leaving scar like continent, foretelling the future of these feet, a map. 20 and twice broken, metal screws and pins to straighten out crooked toes, a family story passed down, then legs, open, open, opening. Waited for the first time, but once started, off I went, chasing the unknowable, unopenable place. Now heart, hot, beat, beat, beating, 10, 100,000 counts a minute, and breath like ocean, like fire, like country music, morning and tousled hair, like the pilfered moonshine of my grandmother's father and West Virginia hills. I traded in my mama's Jesus for a taste of something else. Found Earth and named her God, talked to a black snake in moonlight and realized God is a place big enough for all of us. And then, as if to test this newfound faith, inside this body grew another, a secret held like a letter, author anonymous, secret held too tight, 9 weeks in fear, and then unraveled, undone, untold. This body floated unclaimed, abandoned by mother, my mother, by self, myself, until now, until you tell this story. Turn this body to words, these arms and fingers, toes, clavicle, sternum, awkward elbows, and eager knees. Partition me into pieces. Give these bones to yourself. Hold your secrets in the dark fabric of my marrow. And I wrote that poem as a response to students I was working with, and they were writing really vulnerable pieces. This was back in Oakland, California, when I got to be a mentor to raw talent youth poets that Molly Rayner started. And these students were just putting their life on the line and their whole heart open in their work. And so this is a really vulnerable and intense poem to share. So it's, but it felt like the only possible response to these students who were sharing their lives. So that's this poem, and I'm going to pause myself so you can talk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that poem so much. I think it was so vulnerable, like you said, and I can tell, it's something when you work with, I would say city, right? When you're used to working with city like students, it's different, right? Because not saying that being in the country means you don't go through anything, but it's a different sense of like art and vulnerability and stories that you get, and it's really unique. So I love that. Being from New York City, that's I really learned vulnerability through some of my students, right? Through sometimes we think we have our own stories, and then we listen to our student stories, and we're like, like, I don't know how you're breathing. So I love that. And I love that you put yourself in that, that kind of space of vulnerability. So that was wonderful. I love it. It was so beautiful. Okay, I'm ready for your next one. And if you want to speak more about that, feel free.
Thank you. And I used to write. I did my MFA in fiction, and so I wrote half a novel. And then I was working with these poets, and like their poems are so alive and just like breathing. And so I had written this poem that I thought, oh, this is a good poem. It's so nice. And I started to read it to them when we were practicing. And these students were trying so hard to be polite, but like they could not care about this poem because it wasn't alive. And so they were very politely listening or looking at me or looking at their phone, but you could tell they weren't. So I was like, this is not working. And so I changed my style so that it was this like performative poetry. And now I do a little bit of paper. I call it paper poems, which are poems that look good, like are good to read, but not necessarily to hear read to you. And then performance poetry, and that is 100%. 95% those students and 5% from my thesis advisor Elmas Abanader, who is a Palestinian poet at Mills College. And so between Elmas and these students, they taught me how to, share and be on stage. So that was, I don't know, just like my students were like, how do you become a poet? And I'm like, well, you just need to write, but you need to listen, and you need to listen to your audience, and you need to listen to everyone around you, and you need to listen to other poets. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and share a work in progress. I'm working on a collection of prose poems that were loosely inspired by reading Jim Harrison, who is a poet I just learned about. But my writer group, they're like, this is not Jim Harrison poetry anymore. But so some prose poems, and this one's called Cartel. And so it's halfway true and halfway not true, and we'll see how it goes. Cartel. I am sitting in the middle of this park, listening to the ocean sounds of endless traffic. I am the endless traffic. The engine parts, gasket and carburetor and piston. I am the ocean and curious salt water, sometimes octopus and sometimes anemone, and also the long tendrils of seagrass that pile occasionally on the shore edge. I am the boy paid to shovel away the sea moss in front of a coastal hotel bar in southern Mexico, and I am his older brother who traveled north through cartel lands in search of work and possibly also adventure. I am the cartel land, my desert breath and disintegrating bones, the dry, hard tierra. I am the creosote and the chaparral that remains after bullets soar themselves into the metal sides of cars and windshields dissolve into a broken, radiant beauty. I am the iron and the blood that touches ground, the promise, the burning promise of bodies smoking skyward. I am la cocaína, heroína, oxycodone traded for earth and sky and status like polished golden teeth. The hands of los campesinos, the naked thigh of a young woman, the unburied, the buried, the secret thrill of dying, of memory. La razón por la que la muerta respira. I am a newspaper column in the Sunday edition of the Washington Post, the weekend following Thanksgiving. The newsprint ink washed off a college professor's hand, the cold gears of a dump truck carrying cracked rock and dust, the burning invisible vapor of a combustible engine invented 30 years after the Mexican-American War by a man trying so desperately to hold on.
Oh, I
Oh, I
love that.
love that.
It's so funny how I think you and me are alike that we've had so many different experiences with different diverse communities. And I often tell the story how I had the opportunity when I was still living in New York to go to Spanish, to teach in Spanish Harlem. They had a professor that quit, and so they needed somebody. And they said, Chalet, will you go to Spanish Harlem when you teach? And I said, sure. And, I'm coming from, going from one geographic area that had like a mix of students to now teaching all Hispanic students. And I thought, smart, I knew everything. And I was not connecting with the students because I'm like, what's going on? And I just really had to go and stop and like, I'm not connecting with them because I don't know anything about their life. I have not, even though I live in New York all my life, I have not connected with the Spanish culture enough to know the inner workings of, what's going on in their life. So I began to read all the Spanish literature. And I came to class next day and I read this piece from Pedro Pietre, Puerto Rican's obituary. I don't know if you ever heard it, but it's wonderful. And my students came to life. Like they were impressed because they said she did her homework, like she knows something about us. So I think I love that because the cartel reminds me of that, just being like, I felt like I was connected, like I was going through this person's life and just feeling those emotions. And it's so relevant to what's going on right now in our, society. So I love that piece.
Thank you. I lived in Latin America for 3 years, and I realized I don't tell enough people that. I've worked with my writing group for many years, and some of them just recently realized I lived in Latin America, and they're like, "Oh," and I said, "Well, why do you think so much of my work is, has like Spanish phrases or is drawing on?" I lived in Guatemala and Mexico, like drawing on these places, and they're like, "I don't know, just thought you liked them." And so that poem has obviously clear connections to Mexico, and then thinking a lot about the U.S. Mexico border where people are trying to cross it every day, and then the violence. When I went to Mexico, first I went to Guatemala, and so my dad drove me and my friend from Colorado down to El Paso, which is like a 12-hour drive. And then he was just supposed to leave us at the border, and then we were going to catch a cab across the border and then go to the bus station and ride a bus from Ciudad Juarez down to Guatemala. And when we got there, my dad was like, no, 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 like, no, I'll just take you there. But this was before you needed a passport to cross the border. And my dad had this big old truck with all these lights because he was a firefighter on it, and naked women silhouettes because that's my dad on the mud flaps and on the truck. And so we crossed, and he probably looks a little northern Mexican too, like just kind of like Speedy Gonzalez with black hair. And Speedy Gonzalez obviously is like a stereotypical problematic figure, but um, yeah, I don't know. I think that anyhow. So he drives us across the border, and then took us to the bus station. The border patrol, not the border patrol, the immigration people, the Mexican immigration agents. They were like, "What is this truck? What are you?" And he showed him his firefighter badge, and they're like, "What is happening? What's going on?" And then later I found out that after he dropped us off, he got lost trying to get back to go back to the American border. He doesn't speak any Spanish. I'm not sure why I'm telling that story, but I do remember. Okay, I mean it's a funny story, so that's why I'm telling it. But that was when you could just cross from El Paso to Ciudad Juarez, no problem, and like now you can't. There's all this. Well, you can or you can't. It depends. But there's a lot more, you know, risk on the border, and so I think a lot about that and what that means to the people who live on the border. So anyway, that's part of what that poem's doing.
I love
I
that
love
story.
that. Yeah, I was like, why am I telling this? But
It's a good
thank you. I should make that story. I don't know how I would make it. Could be a short story, maybe not a poem. So this next piece is called Desert Ode, and it's a found poem, which means part of it. This again goes back to Elma's, who in an Outsiders poetry class during my MFA program told us like do a found poem and had all these books, and so we were looking through books and you just find lines that you like. It can be in poetry books, regular books, the news, newspapers, whatever. And you find lines and then you work them together to make a poem. So part of the poem are these found lines, and then part are my response to the found lines. And we'll have again this Latin American theme and a critique of capitalism, which is why people are coming across the border because of capitalism and US imperialism. So that's what's happening here. And this poem is published in Scratching Against the Fabric, which came out of the Bridgewater College International Poetry Festival many years ago and published by Unbound Content. Enter the house, painted across the horizon. Already I feel the longing to guide along with frozen breath, shaman robe, and well-sharpened teeth. Dusty footprints now. Desert skin where once flesh knew rivers. Hands of copal memory, little sisters and masa hold instead empty plastic, 2 liters of dust. To guide along my feet, my mother's dead body, to guide along us, we, my sisters and grandfathers, father holding grandmother's hand. Coyote said, venga, follow me, chiquita. Mythic landscape, now oily smear, horizon brushes fingertips, so close to taste, to lick the greasy fingertips of Mickey D, sting of ammonia in nostrils, now that's the dream, and God bless, if she had made it. God bless. The rest, though, now that's history, the silent margins her footsteps occupy, her space, the space where she was a shadow. Enter the house, mountains have moved, these are dry deserts, a changed skin. Enter the house in the third country, the country that exiled you, the country you went for. Enter the house of my hands, my dead mother's body, a dried out body found by others, pushed past borders. Arbitrary lines on a map in the sand, between the words of SB 2010, NAFTA, CAFTA, just another economic plan. Journeying soldiers follow the season, tomato harvest to strawberries to another dream, visions of indentured servitude. And call it capitalism, call it progress, call it Western hegemonic discourse. Enter the house, enter, all hail the conquering heroes in the land of plenty, plenty of stolen merchandise. Genetically modified corn floods the market, subsidized freehold for farmers who can't afford to grow their own because here we own the land once known before, when you couldn't buy a plant. I mean, forever. I mean, it's genetic code. When you couldn't own the future because who can buy a dream, a hope, a vision? Enter the house, enter heavy climbing wind, dry desert, gnarled outcrops of my father, old as 1,000 hills, and my mother, old as 100 rivers. And money is an invention, a system we create. We buy those broken backs, that bridge they call La Frontera, we buy their deaths for iPods, PlayStation, the Gap, my laptop, your cell phone, national security. These clothes on my back, yeah, they killed her too. Enter the house of my hands, the house of forgetfulness, and see a girl turning her face to the sky. And God bless that girl child in the desert. She left home. She got nowhere. She died in our arms as we tried to push her back to her homeland, no land for her. Solo desierto, la única libertad. Enter the heart, her house, the house of my mother's dead body. Enter the house.
Wow, that was so moving. I didn't even know, I never realized that you studied in Latin America. Actually, we never even talked about that. But wow, that really moved me before. That really moved me to hear that whole piece. And we here in America, we take for granted all the opportunities that we have, and I always tell my students, and I know you tell your students, until you leave America and really see what other countries are like, you haven't really experienced anything, really. Because America hasn't seen poverty in the way these third world countries, right? I mean, even in our poorest, I read one of the pieces that I read to my students is Flavio's Home by Gordon Parks. I'm sure you've heard of it. And I showed them a picture of Flavio with it. And they were like, really, Professor Baptiste? I'm like, yeah. One of the things that Gordon Parks said, and I'm paraphrasing, is he says, in America, we don't know anything about poverty, right? Like Chicago's ghettos and, The ghettos in New York have nothing on places like Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil, right? Where there is, he said, even the dogs are angry because they can't eat, right? The cops don't come out at night. And how Flavio uses the same water that he bathes to eat, to clean, to do everything, because water is so sacred. So I love that. That always reminds me, even though I am, I love America, I'm a patriot, but capitalism does has its downside, right? I mean, and even though this is a capitalist country and we've been able to prosper because of it, many people have been. There are, of course, pros and cons to any system. So I love that, Indigo. Thank you so much for that. I'm ready when you're ready. If you have anything else you want to say.
Yeah, I do think it's really interesting to talk to students who haven't had a wide experience around outside of the world. But I also think that, if you're living in an impoverished community in the US, uh, you do, I think it's important to like honor and recognize those experiences of poverty too. Like, I think that, but I would say that America's conceptualization of itself, or self-concept, certainly does not incorporate poverty that a lot of Americans feel, or a lot of people in Americans experience. I'm thinking about Detroit and Flint, Michigan, like no the water situation there. But I love your point about water, and this next piece actually references this like strange thing that we shower in water that we can drink. And it's interesting, poetry is such an interesting phenomenon because you can really bring in, you want to make the specific general, but not too general, so that it's this delicate balance. And so working with students in creative writing, or in poetry specifically, is an interesting way to bring in all of these different things that we experience and then extrapolate out. That poem I just read kind of cracks me up because I was right in my master's program of fine arts and master's of arts and comparative literature, and I was just really angry. I just moved back to the US, and I was learning a lot about post-colonialism, and I'd been learning already a lot about Western American colonization and imperialism, but now I was having all this like academic words to go along with the things I'd experienced in Latin America, or the things that I'd read and learned about. So the line about Western hegemonic discourse is always cracks me up because it's a weird line for a poem, but I was really angry. And one time I read this poem at JMU, and a student wrote, they were like, she was really angry. I was like, I am really angry, like we're all trapped in this system and some of us benefit from it, but we're all like suffering inside of it. So I don't know. Anyhow, I'll move on to this. This is a poem in 3 parts, and of it, let's see. So it's also taking place in Latin America, but it takes place in the British Virgin Islands, where I met this man, this old man who was a very skinny man, and then he pulled a mango out of his pocket. He was telling me all about his chickens. I was like, where did that mango come from? And he gave me this mango, and it was such an amazing gift. I was 16, and I was just like, this is so odd and wonderful in the world.
Did you eat
it? Heck yeah, I ate that mango. Yeah. I like cut it up for everybody I was with, but I was the most excited. I was like, this man just gave me a mango. This is amazing. Like, what a wonder, like, why did he have a mango in his pocket? I don't know if my grandma's watching, but she's probably like, can't eat mangoes from strangers, Indigo. Like, what? I guess we didn't cover that. Like, I knew no candy from strangers, but mango seemed fine. And then it travels from there to Guatemala, and in Guatemala, where I was living on Lake Atitlan in the highlands, coffee is a major cash crop. And so every year after coffee season, people add like a level or a half level to their house. And so for half of the year, there's like a half of a story on your house, and then you finish it or you start another one. And it was just really fascinating to see, like, you could see the coffee harvest based off how far along people's, multiple stories of their houses were. And then it travels then from Mexico. No, then it travels back to the US. So that's what's happening in this poem. Let's see here. It's called South. Once I met a man standing on a ramshackle dock, blue all around. In between the gaps of his teeth, he told stories. Chickens enough that eggs were never store-bought. The color of rain-wet sand, his skin, each moment a wrinkle, clustered at his smile. Pressed trousers, bare feet, haphazard buttons on a well-worn shirt. From one skinny pocket, he presented a mango. All the world. In Guatemala, houses grow like trees, rainy season fast. December turns the coffee leaves red, and rebar collects concrete, roof becomes floor. Mango is an afterthought, handed out like the way we don't finish the water the server brings. Coca-Cola is cheaper than agua pura, store-bought and fancy, and coffee is instant. I can't remember when $2 was too much to pay for birth control, and $5 meant dinner and a beer. Mangoes on sale here. $1, one mango, a bargain. Café Organico, $1 an ounce. Fair trade and free. How much does it cost to own everything?
Wow. Excellent. I love that. I love that piece. And you use that whole mango scene to make that piece. That's amazing. If you wouldn't have told me that story, I still would have loved the poem, but the story really made it, right. I mean, we think about, and I love the way you took the symbolism of the mango, right, and what that means to compare it to even things that's, in America, right, that we kind of take for granted. And so I love that piece. All right, so I'm ready for the next one if you are.
All right. So this one is published in the Northern Virginia Review, which comes out of Northern Virginia Community College and is for writers all across the Mid-Atlantic. So any Mid-Atlantic writers listening out there, submit to the Northern Virginia Review. It's called Ursus Maritimus, and I'll tell you what that means at the end, but not at the beginning. You will tell your children of a giant bear, white like snow. Snow, they will ask, and you will pause, try to remember, and fail. You will tell your children who wear little clothing, were born swimming and thirsty, of legends. You will define frozen, describe stars and winter. What is cold? They will wonder, and you will see that despite your degrees and the mildewed books lining your walls, despite your broken memories and faded stories, you do not have the words or the science to remember what the world was like before. Will you crumble an apology into their mouths, desperate and eager like fresh, broken birds? And Ursus maritimus is Latin for polar bear.
Now, polar bears, I think, are facing extinction. So, right, and I can hear that, like in your poem, like we need to take care of the earth. Right? Definitely an environmental friendly poem. I love that. I was reading about polar bears the other day. Interesting creatures. So I love that. Great poem. And I just want to say that I love the tone and the rhythm that comes with your poetry. It's so great. It just flows. And the stories make it even better. That's why I like when poets come. There's always a story sometimes behind these poems, and when you're reading them, you don't know the story. So, but yeah, I love it. Thank you. Whenever you're ready, I am.
So this is the last poem I have prepared, but I can always dig up some more if you're interested. But yeah, I do think like that storytelling that happens when writers are reading at a live event or in person, that's just some of my favorite things. And I think it's hard for younger writers to understand that once you write a poem, it's not yours anymore. And so in a sense, like you write a poem, it's out in the world, and it has the meaning that it takes on. And so it depends on the reader or the context, and that poem happens. But then when you're reading your poem and you get to tell the story that comes with it, even though it's the same poem, it also becomes a different poem. And it's kind of neat, that magic. One of my really good friends is a poet, Chuan Choi, and I bring him to Nova all the time because the students just, I mean, he's an extraordinary human and a very gifted writer, and the students love him and just really, really relate to him because he's so chill and open and straight up. So when Chiwan comes, he's always telling these stories, and I feel like every time he comes, I learn even more about him. Even if if he's reading the same poem, it's like a new piece of that story, and it's just really awesome to hear poets do their thing, and then share what happened about it. And it's kind of interesting when you read work and then you hear from the writer who's written it and they tell the story and you're like, what? I didn't know that at all. Like, that's not what I took from it at all. And so it's just, funny how meaning gets layered and changes. This this poem is another prose poem, part of that collection I'm working on right now. I think it's going to be 10 poems, but we'll see. It's called I Believe, and another prose poem. I believe in long stretching asphalt, the worn yellow of a long ago line, crackling reception of FM radio, gas station food wrapped in plastic, the smell of brakes burning, discarded truck tires on the road like the run over bodies of raccoon and possum and sometimes feline. Tobacco fields, glass after glass of whiskey, the memory of the smell of gasoline on my father's work jacket. Black coffee, boulder fields, the peeling bark of birch trees in autumn, smoke of a struggling campfire, the smell of snow, but not yet, waking up cold in a sleeping bag in the dark, salt water, morning radio, sound of newspaper pages turned and folded, my mother's voice talking outside, the hum of a lawnmower against the gray light, jellyfish who don't surrender their lives to a tourist beach, and the ones that do. The tiny crab bodies I find floating in the water I use to wash the shells found on an early morning walk, and the fragile space of their return after the elevator, 12 floors down, the walk to the beach, the search for the perfect spot for their homegoing, the child I did not have and who does not haunt me, the green bird cupped between my palms, the bird daughter I've sung to all my life, the cat named Kitty who ran out to me in the desert when I was searching for the other one, the one I lost, the one I loved, the fluttering unknown gods I feel against my ribcage, inside my bones. There's a hunger desperate in the morning light of a world that buries their bodies, broken and singed and not quite still.
Oh man, I love the way that ended. That gave me chills, that one right there. And I must say that, like, I was raised, I love poetry written too, but I was raised, I used to take my students when I was in New York. I wore my Earth Peace shirt for you and love shirt for you. I don't know if you can see it. I always think about my guests, like, what kind of shirt would they like? I know you would like that Earth Peace and Love. Yeah, I would always think, like, I would always take my students outside of the classroom. And we would go to the New Yorican Cafe in New York. And we would go to these, yes, New Yorican Cafe was amazing. And we would go to all these poetry places and I would let them see live poetry. And even those students who said, I hate poetry, I don't like it, when they left that experience, they was like, I didn't know that was what poetry was all about. And I think it's something about seeing live poets or hearing it. The way the rhythm goes, the way it flows, right? The way it echoes, the way it stings, some of the words, the way it bounces off your heart and then boom, right? It bounces, the words that you connect with. And I love what you said, that once you read a poem, it's no longer yours, right? Because I can write the poem. Once you write the poem, it's no longer yours. Because I can write a poem and I can think this is the part that really is going to get someone's attention. But someone who hears it can say, no, this was it. This was what really got me, So I love that. I'm going to ask that you do one more, but in between you finding one more, Indigo, I'm going to read one, right? Yes, I always do this for my guests. I always read one in between, and I'm going to take it from my book, Black Dresses Stain. This is my first kind of poetry book. Black Dresses Stain, I know you can see it, Black Dresses Stain. And basically this concept was from from basically me thinking black dresses stain. Like, a lot of times women, we wear a black dress. If somebody throws something on it, nobody will see the stain. So it came from the concept that women carry scars, but we still are dress up the part, right? We still play the role, right? And we still kind of carry on and march, even when we're broken and bleeding. So that's kind of where that came from. And this was like, I did a lot of prose in this too, right? A lot of prose poetry and, things that I wanted to do. But I'm going to read from Black Dresses, because you had me. Black Dresses is the one that it's a very mature audience. Let's put it like that, right? So I'm always like, my father used to say, he was a pastor. He'd be like, "Oh my gosh, that book is really mature," and I'm like, "Yes, I know." Okay, and this poem reminds me of me just being raised in Bedford Stuyvesant, in an all basically homogeneous Black community, right? And then going to a school when I was a minority, it was like 10 of us that went to that school that were Black, right? And everybody else was Caucasian. And I made a lot of, friends because, it wasn't a race thing to me. But then I realized that I felt like I was an anomaly to them, like my whole experience, they didn't know anything about. And I just felt like I'm in I'm in a alternate universe, basically. I'm in another world to them. And I felt myself having to like change the tune, like I was going into two worlds. Going back home, I had to be one way, but being with these friends, I had to be another way. And I felt like, wow, I have to exist in two different bodies, in two different worlds, almost like what we study when we study language, right? Speaking the mother tongue language, and you know what that's like, right? And having to code switching, right? Code switching is what it's called. All right, so this is called Other Side. Saks Fifth Avenue, only Lord and Taylor's, and Taylor just won't do. Prada this, Gucci that, your booty's fat. You toss your long, bleach blonde hair in my face and say, Paul Mitchell's a personal friend, so your hair is never thin. Ha ha, Olive Garden is so ghetto cheap. Let's sip the oldest Chardonnay on my porch or balcony or in the library built for the cat. I've been out the country too, but you've never heard a word because your eyes are focused on my secondhand shoes. You're so cynical, you say. And the reason why you do so poorly in life is because you're so cliche. Your writing is never focused or concise, and you would do so much better if you weren't so angry. I can make you be. No, I'm not a lesbian, so I'm not going to pretend to be for the lesbian society or for your boyfriend Billy D. Because you say you're on Prozac because daddy cheats on your mommy and forgot that diamond ring when you were 10. And if your Ritalin doesn't kick in, you might be found skinny dipping and slapping your mama. This is so lame. And the only thing fun is your high. This is so stupid. And the only thing smart is your lies. This is so ugly. And the only thing beautiful is your skin. This is so old. And the only thing new is your breast. You never read the paper because it makes you so damn depressed. You turn to me and ask, is it bad on the other side? The other side, I ask. I thought this was the other side. So we're gonna it's your last poem.
Okay. Well, before that, I just want to say I love that. I haven't heard you write I mean, I know you were writing like you've written. I want to ask you how many books of like you've written, but I didn't know you were writing poetry. And I love the sounds that you're putting together, the juxtaposition and the different voices. Um, yes, that was great. That was I loved that. I loved hearing you. But tell me, how many books have you written, Shelley? Because I know it's like a lot.
Yes. So I've written literally I've written two poetry books. So I've written this is one of them, Black Dress and Stain, and my other one is Relive. And those are the poetry books. And I've written another book which was more like a photography book and a book of stories of all Black people. So it was called Black Dress and Stain. We interviewed Black people and I took a picture. I just wanted to show the aesthetics and hues of Black people and that we all have overcome something. So we had people of all different classes of Black people, all different colors, all different backgrounds, some from the African diaspora, that really told their stories. And so that was important to me during a time when, Black stories weren't really getting told. And then I'm working on two more books. So another poetry book and kind of like a self-help book. So we'll see how that goes. If I can get, but the doctorate is like key right now. So let's, try to get that done.
And we got to write that dissertation book. So dissertation's not a book. I know, but we got to write that dissertation. I agree. Yeah, several of us are in that tricky stage. Well, so my last poem, since we're doing mature themes, I have been jokingly writing, it's not a joke, but so I've been writing poems about Grandma, I'm sorry if you're watching this. Well, she knows. But the different lovers that I've had in the Shenandoah Valley. And so yeah, and I'm I don't like set out to write a poem about them on purpose. You just write your life, right? And so usually these are themes about, something about the person, and then there's themes of the river and God and geology and dirt and bones, like dirt and bones and rivers. That's where my go-to. So I call that.
I do the rivers too. I do the rivers too.
See, yeah. I mean, the river's very powerful. So I call that collection Valley Boys, and it's still a work in progress. But I wrote this poem for one of my Valley Boys, and he knows his name is Clint, and the poem's called Clint. And this was published first in the Tyka Southeast Journal, and now it is also coming out, I think, in 2022. The Texas Review is doing a Virginia book, and so representing all these Virginia poets, and so this poem was accepted to that as well. So here we go. I'll end with that. Clint. At 16, I walked in a river to give God a chance. The night before, I'd gone to prom with a boy cajoled into accompanying me. There are many stories there. At 30, he and I became lovers, but at 16, I tore my vintage dress, found for $52 in the back room of a thrift store, on the edge of his blue car, some sort of a classic. That car would later turn mangled, a combination of too fast alcohol and night roads. Last night, I found the photograph, tuxedo on a country boy with his arms politely around a riverless girl bound in tinsel and crepe de chine. It wasn't until the Spanish-speaking mountains that I found God living in my bones.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I'm like a sucker for love poems anyway, but that was so deep. I love that. And I do a lot of things with rivers too. So that's funny. Like the earth things, earthy nature things always appeal to me, especially when you talk about real life, like love and things like that. I love the fact that you came on my show today. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties in the beginning, but once we got into it, we were not going to let this moment pass. I mean, I cannot wait to read the rest of your poetry, Indigo. So you need to let me know when a book comes out or something, so I can be the first, consumer of your products. Okay, like we support each other, so you know how that goes. But please tell everybody where we can find you. Like, give your social media tag, and any place that we can find you, any place that we can pick up your books and stuff. And I know you're working on some more stuff. Hopefully we got to get together and try to work out this dissertation. We'll do that offline. But I want to say thank you, and please let the audience know where to find you and your products.
Oh, thank you, Shelly. This was so fun and just a really great experience. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for bringing light to my week and goodness. And yeah, let's write that dissertation also. Like, let's head down to the river and write that diss. So I don't have any work for sale out right now. Every now and again, I put together a chapbook that I will pawn off on people who love me and will give me $15, but not available right now. But my Instagram is Violet on the inside, and let's see, it's Violet _on_ Violet on the inside. Yeah. So Violet on the inside, there's some underscores. I can put it in somewhere, and that's where I talk about my poetry or things that are going on. And when things are for sale, you'll find it on the Instagram. But such a pleasure to spend some time with you. So thank you again. And thank you for all of this work that you do, highlighting writers, local writers, regional writers, all these writers, and just your teaching and your research and all of your great stuff. So thank you very much. And thanks to people who tuned in.
Thank you so much for joining me on my show. It was a pleasure. And sometimes we're around people every day and we don't really even get to hear their work and the stuff that they do, because we've always been in comp meetings and, what was it, English, caucuses, right, when we get together and it's like, okay, and it's like focused on work. And we don't get to hear all this great stuff that people are doing on the outside. Like, you going to Latin America and studying there and this great poetry and work that you're doing. So I'm really excited because I feel like I got to know you better. And I feel like your work is phenomenal. I'm so proud of what you're doing and how you're being featured and everything that you continue to shine. I love it. And I want to thank our audience for tuning in. Violet on the inside. That's another reason why I love you, because purple is my favorite color. And so I often describe people by certain colors because colors do make a difference. And I love that. So please, as soon as she has a chapbook for sale on Instagram, let's buy it. Let's make her publish a book, or let's make somebody pick her up to be published. How about that, Indigo? Okay. All right. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.